Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special interview online event to celebrate International Women's Day and the importance of telling women's stories and creating the most amazing female characters. Our celebration is going to look at the importance of writing the family saga, and it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome to this discussion two authors who, without doubt, have the most engaging, the most vibrant family sagas for us to enjoy and for us to pass on to our friends and our relatives. So I'd love to welcome Glenda Young and Annie Doyle in for this discussion. Hello, Glenda. Hello, Annie.
Hi.
How are we?
I'm very well, thank you. It's an absolute joy to be here, especially for International Women's Day with Annie as well. Thank you so much, Jackie. This is brilliant.
And thanks from me as well.
It's a total pleasure because I think you know, during these times of COVID especially, we've learned again, I think, the importance of a good story. We've learned how books can transport us away from some of the difficult moments in life, give us that respite. And even when those stories, you know, are maybe filled with danger and are filled with menace, it just gives us that moment to travel. And what I love about the work that both of you have brought to us is that idea we can travel in time as well. Both of you give us that sense of what life was like. I think the attention to detail that you both pay for those past times it's so delicious. But you also bring us those characters that are filled with courage and filled with determination. And I think when we come out of those pages, you know, we too are encouraged not to give in and to keep going forward. So I wonder if I might begin by asking you both how you got into writing. Glenda, as the established author here, I wonder if I might start with you and ask you, I read that you've loved writing stories ever since you were a child, but when was that moment where publishing those stories, you know, so that we could enjoy them, how did that happen for you?
Oh, well, you know what, well, I'm still pinching myself because even though I've had 6 published and Cozy Crimes as well, it still doesn't seem real, and I think I'm suffering from imposter syndrome because I have wanted this all of my life. I've always loved writing ever since I was a child, and always did write, and used to write short stories and poems and then put them at the back of my knicker drawer and forget all about them. And I grew up in a council estate in a small working class ex-pit village, which is where my books are set. But growing up in the 1970s, I'm showing my age now, there were no opportunities for kids like me from, you know, households like mine. The only book that we ever had in the house was my mum's B-roll book. So reading wasn't a part of our lives. I had nowhere to go with my desire. There was an absolute passion to write, but it had nowhere to go. We just, you know, my parents didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it. Becoming a writer just seemed, becoming an astronaut and landing on the moon would have been possible because at least you could go to the library and find out how to do that, whereas to become a writer, because it just wasn't worth thinking about. So it's only really in the last few years that I have actually started getting published. I'm a huge Coronation Street fan, and it all stemmed from there because I got invited by ITV to update some official Coronation Street books. And while I was doing all of the Corrie books, I always had it in the back of my mind that I was retelling somebody else's story. Tony Warren, who wrote Coronation Street originally, created these fantastic women, the Elsie Tanners, Bette Lynch, Annie Walker, all of these memorable characters, Hilda Ogden. And I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to create my own women as well. didn't really know how to go about that, but I wanted it. I wanted some of that as well. So I started writing short stories for women's magazines to see if I actually did have it in me to write a story and if I could tell a story. And it turns out I did. And the women's magazine started publishing the stories. And one of the women's magazines, The People's Friend, which is aimed at a slightly older lady, loved my story so much. And they knew about the Corrie book. So they asked me to write their first ever weekly soap opera called Riverside. And I've been doing that now for since 2016, so for a few years, every week.
Yeah.
It's fun, it's frothy, but it's very traditional. It is written for the market, the readership of that magazine, but it remains the highlight of my week because I just love sitting down to write Riverside. It's like sitting down with a group of friends now that I've created. So on the back of Riverside, I got an agent down in London, a literary agent, and that was when things really changed for me. My agent encouraged me to write the novels which were set in the village where I grew up, the Pit Village, and my debut novel, Belle of the Back Streets. My agent sold it. She had 3 publishers fighting over it after I'd only written 5 chapters. Now, even when I'm saying this all these years on, it still doesn't feel real. It feels like it's happened to somebody else. But Headline gave me a 3-book deal, then another 3-book deal, and then another 2 books. At the same time, I've also been writing cozy crimes. So I've gone into a different genre. The cozy crimes are not historical. They're set in Scarborough, modern day Scarborough. They're a lot of fun. There's humour in these books because Northeast women, there's got to be humour.
Yes.
Especially at the end of First World War, you needed that dark sense of humour to get you through some pretty horrible times. But the cozy crimes are the more of a comedy book with a murder thrown in rather than a crime. You know, I think crime diehards would be absolutely appalled. No, I shouldn't be saying that about my own work.
Not at all.
But they are really good fun. And so at the moment, I'm alternately writing sagas with cozy crimes, and I'm writing my weekly soap opera. I'm living my own dream, basically. If someone had told the 6-year-old Glenda who used to write poems and stories that I'd be standing here talking to Annie and Jackie on International Women's Day, and I'd be going on this thing called the interweb. Well, yeah, so I'm absolutely, I couldn't be happier is what I'm trying to say. Just the long and the short of it.
Glenda, I really appreciate you sharing that journey with us, because I think, again, it just proves that the importance of following your dreams, and you know, when those seeds are there, you know, despite whatever happens, to watch for those opportunities, when those opportunities arrive, to grasp those opportunities and to make the most of them. You know, you spoke about that, you know, the idea of, you know, a background that you know, that didn't really speak to being a published author. And yet, to me, it's that sense of, but that little girl, who, I love the way you said you put things in the back of a knicker drawer, the safest place to put things. And yet here you are now, you know, standing by those book covers, and it has happened. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Annie. I want to ask you the same, if I may, because the thought of being able to celebrate you as a debut author, you know, the start of that journey, and how exciting it is, you know, as when anybody sets off on an adventure, you know, to see, you know, the cover there of the Cocoa Girls, and to know that, you know, again, an idea that began, that could have been, you know, just blown away on the wind. Nice idea, but no, but it stuck, and there it is. So tell us about, Annie, you and writing, and this moment of now being able to say, I am published.
Well, a bit like Glenda, really. It's sort of unbelievable. And firstly, I'd just like to say I could listen to Glenda all day, read her books all day, listen to you talk, because in some respects, my journey is similar. In others, it's incredibly different. Similar in the sense of just never believing this could be a thing. for me, again, working class Northeast girl, but who always loved to write. And not the knicker drawer for me, but I used to write when I was quite small, quite young, poems, little poems. And a couple were published in the Evening Chronicle. And I think that was mainly because my dad worked at the Evening Chronicle, not necessarily because they were any good or anything like that. However, the desire was always there for reading, for storytelling, and for writing. The thing that really got in the way for me for so long was work, because I worked, and I worked in some crazy jobs away from home and ridiculous hours. And people would say, well, you could write in the hotel, you can write on the train. It wasn't, it just didn't happen. So it's really only been these last few years since I've not been working, since I've been retired, although I suddenly seem to have a second career, which is great, that I've been time rich. So I've been able to actually put the time in. And this desire for writing just never went away. And the question of what to write, because like Glenda, I think we're the product of where we're from. So we have a lot of this Northeast humour. There's a bit of humour in my book, although doom and gloom also. But it was this notion of family that really hooked me in. And my mum asking me to do some family history research, because we'd always had these big questions about my maternal ancestors, my nana, her mother. There were lots of secrets and half-truths, and my mum asked me to have a look into it. So I did. I started genealogy, and that's a rabbit hole you can go down and get lost in for days, and I love it. But I got this germ of an idea for a story based on my nana's life, and it's the Cocoa Girls. And different to Glenda, I tried last year to find an agent. I think I submitted to something like 16 agencies and didn't have any luck, although I got some positive feedback. And I know some debut authors would probably say, well, 16's nothing, keep trying, keep trying. But there was a pressure for me in wanting to give my mum a copy of the book. So I decided to go down the self-publication route, and my book was published on Amazon in December. It's now available in Waterston's and Blackwell's to order, not yet a physical copy on the shelves. Each step that I take is a massive, massive step.
Yeah.
And again, I just sort of can't really believe I'm here having this conversation, but I wouldn't change a thing.
Annie, many congratulations on, again, following an idea, that determination, because I think, again, what I'd like to, acknowledge for both of you, it's that it's not just women who write, but it's women who make things happen so that we can also share your stories. Do you know what I mean? I can imagine that many of us who sit and read also maybe like to scribble a little bit and put ideas down, but aren't yet at that point where we think, I'd like other people to read what I'm writing. And I think to have taken that step, Glenda, you talked about the imposter syndrome that still seems to hover. I wish it would go away. But to have actually battled with that, and to have reached this point of being able to say, just for a minute, just be quiet, because here are my, if I can call them babies, here are my stories, and I want to share them. So thank you both for battling against so many things, I can imagine, because it's easy for us that just, we send for a book, or we go to the library and we take out a book, or we go to the bookshop and we buy a book. And very often, I think it's easy for us to forget what's gone in to making that creation come into being. So again, I want to thank you, but I have a question now for you. And my question is this: the time period that you set your books in, and what it was like, just a general overview to start with, what it was like for women at that time. Because again, here we are, we're doing this interview for 2022. And, if we go back in time, what was it like for women? Glenda, do you want to set us off with that?
Sure. Yeah, my books are all set at the end of the First World War. So it's a time when soldiers are coming back from the First World War. Some of them are injured or mentally injured. And it's a time when women had gone out of the house to actually work in the factory, taking up the men's jobs in factories, on public transport. So women, it was a time of huge change, and the men were coming back home. So there's all that conflict about what that might mean for women. Are they going to be happy being forced back home? So I just felt at that time, if there was, when I was doing I do a lot of research in my books, but I have to say, I not all of it goes into the books, because the last thing people want when they sit down to read a story is the mechanism behind the story. The readers don't need to know the research, but I do. Mm. And I just felt at that time, there was a time of possibilities that anything could happen, because everything was up in the air. The Great War had gone on for 4 years and times were changing. So the girls, I call them the girls in the stories, they undertake work that men would have done normally. So in Belle at the Backstreet, she takes on her dad's rag and bone round, for instance, when he comes back from war, he's really ill. And it's not a spoiler to say that he dies, because he dies right at the front of right at the start of the book. And that's the catalyst for Meg taking on his job. So it's a time of great change. And so I researched what the women wore at that time, what the food that they cooked for their families, that what came across more than anything in all of the research I've done about mining families and communities in the Northeast was just how hard it was. I mean, dreadful. And I've got, I know you can't see it, but across the room from where I'm standing is a huge map of the village in 1921, which is the closest I could get to the end of the First World War. And on the map, you can see where it's actually the water taps in the back lanes are marked. So there's rows and rows of pit houses all crammed together. And at the back, there were the netties and the water taps, where all these people in each street had to share. So then you can start to imagine the muck and the dirt and the smell, and the women trying to keep everything and everybody clean, and just that the sheer hardship and horror of life, and the women it all together. It's fantastic to read about, and I try to bring it to life as best I can without putting the reader off, because at the end of the day it's a story and it's fiction, and I want the reader to stay with me. If I put the research down in the way that I read it, the way that I was picking it up from academic books or history books, the reader would just turn off, because sometimes it's pretty grim. It's really bad.
But Glenda, I think that again is one of those, it demonstrates how good a writer that, we end up learning stuff, even though we don't realize that we're learning when we're reading, and just gaining that understanding of different times in different people's lives. And if anybody who's watching who's not from the Northeast, the netty is the outside toilet. Yeah. So again, just that a lovely, that cultural aspect of times and places. Thank you, Glenda. Annie, for you, is Cocoa Girls, is it set at the same time or not? Tell us about the background to the book.
It's a bit earlier. And just before I say that, if I can say about Glenda's girls or women in your stories, amidst that grimness, you have these strong, determined women who are, going to battle everything in order to try to make their lot better. And I think that's a similarity between us, not the timeline so much, but women. In my story, I start in 1903 with a scene where our main character is abandoned outside the workhouse. So her fate is unknown, dire. But then I'll step back in time, I go even further back, and just to sort of say something about the research as well. When I stepped back in time, and I didn't just step back in time, but I went to Paris in the story for my main character's grandmother's backstory, I thought, I have to do some research here. And again, how fascinating it was to read about what Paris was like. This was 1882 that I went back to, what Paris was like, and then how this character made her way to England. I knew nothing about the route she would have to take, the travel, the forms of transport, but finding out about all of that was so interesting. But again, like Glenda says, you know, you have to just give the reader the facts they need for the story, what happened to this character on the ferry, on the train. But I could have just read about this forever. So I step back in time, but then I come back, and the book goes to Paris, it goes to London, it eventually goes to New York City in America. But the main character, Evie, stays in the Northeast. So there are those conditions which at the time for women and girls were harsh, were really, really brutal. And one of the hooks in my story is the reaction of my women to those circumstances, what they were prepared to do to get out of the dire poverty, the situation where if they worked, which my women did, they worked in awful, heavy, manual, dirty jobs. There was a rope works not far from here where we live. 3 of my characters worked there. And the women really worked there, my ancestors worked there. Because for a woman who was left without a male head of household, especially if within that household there was a young, illegitimate baby, the threats to them were immense, social and economic. So my story concentrates on these women, the battles they were prepared to face to get out of those situations. And the other theme running through my story is one of music and dance, because this is what these women did. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but in order to raise themselves up from those lowly beginnings, the stage was one prospect. So it was all about the things they were prepared to do, and dancing was one of those.
Annie, thank you so much. I think, you know, both of you, from our conversation, you know, what comes out is that sense of women's determination, women's ingenuity, women's bravery, and that strength to find a way forward. Now, I am going to ask you about one of your characters in a moment, but I know you've promised both of you to give us a wee read, and I'm ever so grateful for that. Glenda, I wonder if could you give us your reading, and then I'll come back and ask you a little bit about that. We'll talk about these main characters, or one of the characters I'd like for you both to talk to us about. And then Annie, you know, if you could then bookend that with your reading, is that okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So Glenda, if you will, we'll just sit back and get ready.
Yeah, I'm just going to nip across here to get my reading glasses.
Excellent.
One moment.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
I'm back. So I'm going to read just a little bit from, this is my most recent novel called The Miner's Lass. She's up here. This is the hardback cover where they've got a hat on her and she looks a bit stern. And for the paperback, they changed it. So she's got no hat, she's looking a bit happier, and she's got a nice pink pinafore on. And I think probably the character, I see this more of her because she is stern, because she's got a lot to put up with. But there's a lovely scene I'm going to read. It's only a page long, and it is based on some research that I found. In the pit lanes, the women used to string their washing across the lane. I mean, I think some, you know, back-to-back houses probably still do. So the string they're washing out across the lane on a Monday when it's washing day. And then in the research I was reading, while the washing was blowing in the wind, one of the delivery lads with his horse and cart would come down the street paying no attention to the washing. So the washing would come off the line, they'd be all over, the horse would be, you know, treading its muddy footprints all over. And naturally the women were getting a bit upset with this. Mm-hmm. So they decided to take matters into their own hands. And I thought, what would they do? So this is where they get a bit fed up with the delivery boy. The cheek of the lad, Elsie cried. Lasses, Lil Mahone called, are we going to just stand here and let this lad trample our washing to the ground again? No, they shouted. Over my dead body, Elsie said. Come on, Ruby, let's sort him out. Me? What can I do? Follow me, Elsie commanded. Ruby matched Elsie step for step as the older woman stormed up the lane towards the lad on the cart. Women came out from every yard and followed them. Some women were carrying bairns. Some were holding hands with toddlers pulling them along. Others walked with their hands on their hips, fury all over their faces. One woman even picked up a stone and held it tight, ready to throw. Now there's no need for that, Elsie said with a warning look, and the woman dropped the stone. A small army marched up the back lane behind Elsie and Ruby. Mary hung back with Lady, who's the dog, Lady at her side. She didn't have the strength to go marching with the women, but she wasn't going to miss watching the action unfold. The cart driver brought his horse to a halt as soon as he saw the woman trooping towards him. What's up, lasses? He called. The women stood in a line across the lane, blocking the horse and cart. They crossed their arms and glared at the young lad. And he was young, inexperienced too, sent by the older men from the store who knew only too well the risks of trying to deliver goods in the pit rows on washing day. Now listen here, you, Elsie said sternly. You're to turn around and come back any day but Monday when there's washing out. I can't do that, the lad said. I'll get sacked if I don't make my deliveries. Without turning, Elsie called to the woman behind her. Any of you lasses want a delivery today? No, Elsie, one of them cried. Not me, not today, not on a Monday, not on washing day. You heard them, she told the lad. Now scram, and don't you ever come here on a Monday again. And that's it. And then they do chase him off. Come back.
Isn't it lovely being read to? I could be read to all day long.
It's so good. And again, you know, memories of childhood, you know, I'm sure many of us had that moment of just being transported. Glenda, the passage that you've just read for us, again, what I'm struck by is that solidarity.
Yeah.
Amongst women, you know, and understanding, you know, the effort that you know, I think again, it's maybe difficult for us to think because, you know, we put things in the washing machine and we let it happen. And you know, if we're lucky with a tumble dryer as well, then what do we need to bother? But I mean, this was manual, physical, hard labor. I mean, a whole day doing that washing for somebody just to muck it up again. It's like, no. So Glenda, if you were to choose, and thank you for your reading, if you were to choose, I don't know if you'd choose a character from The Miner's Lass or if you'd choose a character from one of your other books to tell us about. I know it's probably difficult because I know you've got many, but do you have a favourite and why?
Oh, now you're asking. Well, I do have a favourite, and it's I love these. I love them the bits. Just both. My favourite is the next one that's about to come out. Now, this is not a self-promotional plug. I know it's going to sound like it. My favourite is the next one that's going to come out. It's a Christmas Saga. It comes out August and then October in paperback. And she's fantastic. She is my most rebellious heroine. I won't give any spoilers away.
Can you tell us what she's called?
She's called Emma. She's Irish. She comes over. She's an outsider to the village, so she comes over from Ireland. She's been sent from Ireland because she's done something so scandalous, and it's not. It doesn't. She's not pregnant. That's too. That's too obvious. She's done something so scandalous that she cannot stay where she is. So her mum puts her on the boat to Liverpool, and then she has to find her own way on the train to Riot, where she's taken in by her auntie. I'm laughing because I love it, absolutely love it. So that's me. It's my favourite because she's rebellious. She's I can't say too much about her. but what she does when she comes to riot redeems her. Yeah, and it's lovely. And believe it or not, as part of the research for that book, I watched Gone with the Wind because I wanted that Scarlett O'Hara kind of, you know, I wanted that rebelliousness. So I sat down and watched that, and it was a bit of a slog. I went on for a few hours, but that helped me form the character of Emma for my book.
And what's the name of the book, Glenda?
It's going to be called A Mother's Christmas Wish. And it's about, in my book, The Twopenny Child, there's a tradition in Ireland called the Women's Christmas that I'd never heard of. But when I was researching The Twopenny Child, a friend of mine in Dublin said she was going out to celebrate the Women's Christmas on January the 6th. So I asked her what it was, and I found out that it was this annual tradition where the women celebrate their own Christmas. And I was so taken by it, I put a whole chapter in and made one of my characters Irish just so I could put it in. And then in The Mother's Christmas Wish, the one that's coming out later this year, the whole book is about the Irish Christmas. So Emma, she's got lots of faults and she's fantastic. She comes from Ireland to riot, and she brings with her this tradition of the Irish Women's Christmas. So she heals a lot of people, a lot of women with the Women's Christmas.
And it's set in the same time period, yeah? Yeah, fab.
It's almost, but not quite, a follow-on to The Twopenny Child. It's got some, it's set in the same pub, and it's got some very similar characters.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So, Annie, just to sort of like do a little mirror here on our conversation. I know there are so many amazing women in the Coco Girls, those generations of women. I think that's what struck me about the book. It's almost like there's this seam that runs through a family, you know, just like, you know, like in a pit village, there's that seam of coal. And in your characters, there's that strength that runs through the family. You can only choose one for today. I'm really sorry. Which one are you going to choose to tell us about and why?
I'll tell you in a moment, but just before I do, just about the Women's Christmas. This is so fascinating because, especially with this being International Women's Day, in Italy, in Milan, years ago, we'd gone on holiday, and it was either January the 1st, New Year's Day, or January the 2nd. We'd gone for a walk in a park, and there were all these groups of women having a picnic, food and drink, and it was just women. There wasn't a man amongst them. And I learned that it was something similar. The Italian women bagged this day for themselves. And I love this notion that we're able to say, we're going to do this, and we're all going to do it, and we're going to do it together, like the women with the washing. We're going to band together and have this day. So that's the first thing I would say. Yes, Jackie, you're right. I've got 3 generations of remarkable women in here. And it is hard, but I think because it's the Coco Girls, and that title came from a photograph of my nana, and she'd written this on the back, her and her friend. I think it has to be the Nana character, my Nana's character, which is the young girl, Evie, because the story really is about her and her fate after she's abandoned at 4 years old. Her mother, her aunt, her grandmother, they're key characters throughout. But for the purposes of this reading, I want to talk a little bit about Evie. The context to the couple of pages I'm going to read is that Evie is 12, and she's, for the first time in her life, learned something about her mother. And what she's learned is that her mother is in London. So her determination to escape from the poverty, the abuse, the neglect that she's lived in for the last 8 years spurs her on with this knowledge. She won't be beaten by what she's living through at the moment. She's determined to escape, and she has a friend, Nancy, who is deaf and dumb, and they hatch a plan to escape. So that's what these couple of pages are about. Evie and Nancy left Lizzie's early the next morning. Lizzie is Evie's erstwhile very inappropriate alcoholic guardian, before the old drunk was awake. Evie explained her plan, and Nancy signed that she would go on one condition. She wanted to tell her mother and send for her when they were settled with Evie's mother in London. Evie agreed, and they arranged to catch the train from Newcastle to London on Saturday, as soon as Evie got her hands on Lizzie's wages. That night, Evie tossed and turned, trying to work out how to distract Lizzie long enough to grab her wages and flee. Lizzie guarded her money like a hawk guards its prey. Evie knew she needed to wait until enough of Lizzie's customers had collected their alterations and paid. Saturday arrived, and Evie couldn't wait to escape. Lizzie shuffled around the ramshackle room. "What are you looking at, you little gutter snipe? Here, make yourself useful and sweep the floor." Lizzie snarled as she threw the broom at Evie. Evie caught it, smiling. Yes, of course. She could be generous. It was the last time she would do Lizzie's dirty work. By dinner time, she had been shoved outside while Lizzie entertained her customers. She walked back and forth and drummed her fingers on the windowsill. She cupped her hand around her face and peered in as Lizzie collected her wages and put them on the table next to her sewing machine. Evie knew as soon as her last visitor left, Lizzie would take the money and head to the Globe. The crone was the last of Lizzie's visitors, and Evie needed to be patient. This visit would be the longest. The old gossips swapped tittle-tattle and drank sherry, sometimes for hours. Today was different, and as the scene unfolded, Evie smiled. The crone crept inside, and a familiar cackle reached Evie as the women sat, ready to engage in their usual chin-wagging. After a while, Evie caught something on the crone's lips. The crone asked Lizzie to fetch the skirt she had left for alteration, and Lizzie pushed herself out of her chair. Evie gasped. She had used the crone's skirt to wipe Nancy's cuts and bruises after her father beat her. She had stuffed the ruined garment in the corner, not knowing or caring what happened to it. It was behind the coal scuttle, and Evie giggled as Lizzie fumbled around, searching in vain for the piece of clothing. The women became more agitated until Lizzie reached behind the coal scuttle. The crone screeched. Evie didn't need to lip read to know. She was swearing and cursing like a time navvy. The crone grabbed the ruined skirt. She delivered a hard punch to Lizzie's face before heading to the door. Lizzie stumbled. She reached for the crone and grabbed a handful of filthy hair, pulling her back into the room. As they fought, Evie ran inside, grabbed the money and a small bag of belongings and ran. Her lungs were ready to burst when she arrived at the swing bridge. She leant against the wall and tilted her head back. She yelled, big, loud yells. People stared, but she didn't care. She was free. She looked around. She hadn't been able to give Nancy a specific meeting time, but she was happy to wait. She had waited years to escape. A few more hours were nothing. She found a spot on the riverbank with a vantage point of their meeting place, and she waited. Once Nancy arrived, they would walk over the bridge to Newcastle and make their way to the train station. They would catch the train to London and find her mother. It grew dark as she waited, and still there was no sign of Nancy. She walked to the Newcastle side of the bridge, but the street was deserted. She walked back, her steps heavy. She could cross the bridge and catch the train to London on her own, but she wouldn't abandon Nancy. She needed to know her friend was all right. She trudged back to Pipewell Gate, anticipating Lizzie's reaction. Lizzie sat, hunched and fuming in the dark, as Evie slowly pushed the door open. Despite her drunken state, Lizzie's fury propelled her across the room to deliver the first forceful blow. Sometime later, Evie crawled towards her mattress, battered and bruised.
Oh, my goodness. Again, you know, the times and people's experiences. But in Annie, in what you've just read to us, however shocking it is, again, there's that feeling of solidarity that Evie wasn't prepared to go without her friend, and knowing what might very well befall her, were she not to go. And it's almost like, you know, like she sacrifices her own dreams to be able to go and find her mum. I wonder, would, you know, the times we live in, are we prepared to sacrifice our dreams, you know, for our friends? I think you're right in us big questions of us, you know. Mm-hmm. You know, even though you're telling somebody's story, I feel it comes back on us and asks those questions. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Writing strong female characters, and I'm going to close our discussion, much as it pains me to do that, because I know we could talk long and long about, you know, your stories, but this idea, and I don't want to do this in a trite fashion, but why is it important for you, both of you, to create these strong characters whilst they're set in the past, but you're writing now? Glenda, what does that mean for you?
I think I write the type of female characters that I want to read about. So these are women doing unusual jobs, or you know, I chuck everything in the kitchen sink at them, giving them lots of obstacles to overcome. So the stakes are high. There is violence in the books, of domestic abuse. So I make sure that the women always come through on top. So I want to always just celebrate being a woman, and what we are capable of, or what we can do if we put our minds to it, even when, you know, the society's against you, the world's against you, you know, you've got no money. One of my books, the child, is about the outsider coming in. She lands in Riot. She's got no money, she's got no friends, she doesn't know anyone, yet she becomes the first woman in the village to wear trousers, to ride a bike. She starts selling bread, and so she starts her own business. And that's the kind of woman I want to be friends with, even now.
Yeah.
That's why I like Annie so much. So I write the kind of woman that I want to read about, and hopefully I enjoy writing it so much that the reader gets that as well. I'm sure they do, people tell me. So yeah, and I have to say that I have read Annie's book as well, and I likened it to a goldfish bowl where the fish were glittering and sparkly and beautifully coloured inside, because the motif of the dance and the stage and the performance is wonderful. And
thank you.
It brings it to life fantastically.
That's lovely, Glenda. Thank you. And similar for me, Jackie, in terms of the women, we read, you know, about women in history more than 100 years ago, women who fought to get us the vote, and women who did many, many things. And I want to write about those women, the strong women, the women who achieved things against the odds. And these female ancestors of mine that my story is based upon did some absolutely remarkable things at a time when women didn't leave Gateshead and go to London and then get on their own, and then get on a ship. You know, I have ships manifest records of my great-grandmother and great-great-aunt, and they're going back and forth to Broadway. And women didn't do that. You know, women stayed at home, and they followed those traditional stereotypical roles. And I want my women to not do that. I want them to do the opposite and achieve things, to wear the trousers, to go cycling. You know, my mother at 90, when she was 20, she did Europe with a friend. They got on their bicycles and they stayed in youth hostels, and they went to Paris, they went to Norway, to Austria, and they worked as au pairs. And I just think those women need to be celebrated, and we can do it through our writing and through talking about them, through not forgetting about them.
I think, you know, that idea as well of, if you'll forgive me if I say this, ordinary women, and by that I mean women who weren't in positions of privilege, you know, who weren't born into to families of considerable wealth. That's what I mean by ordinary women. But ordinary women doing extraordinary things. You know, I think your books bring us that kind of character who says, despite my background, despite experiences that I have to say, you know, they're quite unpleasant, but you write it so well, okay? And yet, you know, they are not held back. They won't give in. They dare to do. And in the daring to do, they achieve. And I think it's so exciting to see that happen. I mean, I've got a massive desire to see, you know, to see your stories. You know, I'm hoping that we get to see them on the screen as well, because you know, I love that. I love when, you know, characters take on flesh and blood, as it were. But that's just a dream of mine. You know, I like to put these things out to the universe. We can but hope. For both of you, I've got a last question. Glenda, you've already spoken about what might be coming next, but I'll come back to you on that a little bit. Annie, Cocoa Girls is now available online and in bookshops. But whilst we're still shouting about Cocoa Girls, and I know, you know, there's events coming up where we can enjoy talking more about this, but you finished writing Cocoa Girls. So what's next in the writing?
Well, what's next is The Village on the Hill, which is the second book. The standalone stories, but The Village on the Hill follows some of the same characters. So the Cocoa Girls ends in 1911, 1912, and The Village on the Hill begins with a character embarking on RMS Titanic. So one character is involved there. Another character is heavily involved in the First World War. So that's the research I'm doing at the moment. And again, women doing remarkable things, because as Glenda said at the start of this, during the war, the women left at home, did the jobs, you know, they did a lot of the things that the men had been doing. And also, and I had already started writing this or thinking about it before coronavirus hit, but the timing as well of the second book covers the Spanish flu. So we've got characters caught up in various global events, but also the thread of what's happening at home. So Village on the Hill, I have about 10,000 words down at the moment, and I'm getting on with that.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful to think that, you know, the stories continue. I know it was so important for you, you know, to get the Cocoa Girls out there, but I really love the idea that this is something that's been set in motion. This isn't there we are, the book's written, that's it. But there are stories that are there that need to be told, and that you're needing to write them. So wish you all the very best with what's coming next. That's brilliant, Annie. Yeah.
I have to carry on, because one of these female characters in real life had at least four husbands. I found 4. I might find a 5th, my mum reckons. So she's got a lot of stories still to be told. Not telling you which one.
Oh, indeed, but and yeah, I suppose we should, of course, say that, that you both of you don't just, write stories filled with women, that you do have, male characters in there as well. But I think, to give, because I think throughout history, that it is the male voices that appear to predominate, and I think your stories go some way to bring that balance about, to hear those women's voices, so important. Glenda, you've told us about the next book, A Mother's Christmas Wish, but you did mention, and don't mind me asking this, but in my guise as Dr. Noir, I can't help but come in and ask you about your cozy crimes set in Scarborough. Do you still, though, in that writing, do we have a strong female character in that?
The cozy crimes, the first one is called Murder at the Seaview Hotel, and so the Seaview Hotel is fictional in Scarborough, except in my head I know exactly where it is. And it's run by a woman, and at the start of the first book she's got a dilemma because her husband's just died, and she doesn't know whether to sell up and move on or stay where she is and run the hotel on her own. Her husband was a huge Elvis fan, so as she's struggling with this dilemma of what to do, the phone rings and she takes a booking from a group of 12 Elvis fans called Elvis. And she takes that as
I love that.
You can sing. It's so much fun. She takes the booking from Elvis. 12us as a sign to stay. So 12us arrive, but one of them gets killed, and his blue suede shoes are stolen. So that's when our problems kind of really begin. But so we've got a female sleuth with a female. She's got a dog, a rescue dog called Suki. She's got Jean the cook, who's this wonderful. Quite straightforward, straight-talking Yorkshire woman of a certain age, and she's got a cleaner called Sally, who's a single mother with a daughter. So there's, yes, again, unity, mutually supportive women who are solving murders. And so the second one is just about to come out this year, so it's quite a busy year for me because I've got a saga coming out and the second cozy crime, which is Curtain Call at the Seaview Hotel, and that's this time we've got an acting troupe coming in. I know a little bit about acting behind the scenes of Amdram and things like that, so it's a lot of fun. The leading lady is a complete diva, and the playwright is highly strung. The characters are fantastic, and there's only 6 of them this time. There's not 12 like the others. So I'm actually I'm taking the whole of this month off. Off writing, although my mind is still going making stories up, and then when I start writing again I'll be writing the third cozy crime, so that's my next job of work, if you like. So I'm sure it'll involve going to Scarborough for a few days to research, which is my favorite place. So so that will keep me busy up to Christmas, so that's what I'm doing for the rest of this year.
Thank you. Annie, Glenda, thank you for taking time out to talk about your writing, your inspiration, the places, those characters, but above all, to talk about that notion of strong women, solidarity, and women making things happen. We are living in difficult times with one thing or another, and may we know those kind of women in our lives. And I just wish you all the very best. May inspiration continue to be with you, and may your stories continue to reach us, to inspire us, to entertain us, and just as I said right at the start, to transport us to places and times, just to give us a really good read. Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you.